15-year-old Marcus saw the dead Harley on the shoulder, the giant biker in a winged skull vest kicking the tire. He pedaled over with his rusty toolkit and worked 2 hours under the desert sun, refusing the man's crumpled 20s. My grandma says kindness is a chain. He didn't know the foreclosure notice was taped to her door. The next morning, 50 motorcycles shook that sagging house on Mesquite Road. Marcus wasn't a mechanic for hire. He was a kid holding a crumbling house together with scavenged parts. His grandmother's pension stretched past breaking. The foreclosure notice on the front door was a countdown neither of them could stop. So when he pushed his toolkit toward a stranded Hell's Angel, he expected nothing in return. He had no idea that a single chain of kindness was about to pull an entire brotherhood onto that dying lawn. That house on Mesquite Road was his grandmother's inheritance, her husband's life from 50 years ago, brick by brick, a man who died before Marcus was born. Now peeling paint like dead skin, porch slats you could fall through, a roof that buckled in the Arizona monsoons and never healed. His grandmother, Miss Loretta, retired teacher, 72, with a pension that barely kept the lights on and a heart that skipped when the mail truck pulled up on the first of the month. She'd raised Marcus alone since he was 6, after his mama left for Phoenix and never came back. Not a word. Marcus stopped asking at 8. At 10, he took apart a lawnmower engine on a dare, and by 12 he was fixing every broken thing on the block for whatever people could pay. A few dollars, a bag of groceries, once a used carburetor he cleaned and kept like treasure. He'd pedal that rusted bike to the auto salvage on Cactus Road and trade labor for parts, reading Chilton manuals in the dim trailer light while the lot owner napped in a hammock. He learned the language of engines the way his grandmother learned scripture by heart, by feel. The foreclosure notice had been taped to the front door for 3 weeks. Miss Loretta had taken out a second mortgage when the medical bills from her fall stacked up, and the bank, some faceless office 3 states away, didn't care about late payment arrangements or the fact that she'd taught 2 generations of kids in this county to read. The deadline was 46 days out, a Tuesday. Marcus counted them in pencil on the kitchen wall. He'd been holding the fear under his tongue like a bitter seed, never telling his grandmother he saw the papers, never letting her see him count. That Thursday afternoon, the heat hit 107. He'd been out to the salvage, bartering an alternator for an old water pump, when he spotted the chrome glint on the shoulder of Route 95. A Harley, a beautiful black custom bagger with a skull and wings on the tank, steam hissing from the exhaust. The man beside it was a wall of leather and road dust, a patch on his back that read Hell's Angels and a snarl that could wilt cactus. He kicked the tire hard, cursed under his breath. Marcus coasted over, heart thumping, the toolkit rattling. "I can fix it," he said. The biker looked at him like he was a mirage, but Marcus was already off his bike, tools out, lying on the hot asphalt to find the split hose, the seized bolt. 2 hours under that sun while his grandmother's roast sat forgot. He talked to the engine with his palms like a doctor. The biker tried to hand him a wad of damp 20s. "Keep it," Marcus said. "You're in trouble, I can tell." "My grandma says kindness is a chain." The big man stared, then nodded slow. He asked the boy's name. Marcus told him, and the biker just said, "You ain't seen the last of me." Then he gunned the engine and vanished into the heat shimmer. Marcus pedaled home, too tired to feel anything but empty. Inside, Miss Loretta was asleep in her chair, the foreclosure notice folded under the lamp, unpaid. He didn't know that 200 miles north, in a clubhouse outside Kingman, that biker was standing before a table of 12 men, his voice still raw. And the chapter president, a man called Scratch with a face like a closed fist, listened to the whole story in silence, then set his beer down and said 4 words: "Call up every brother." The phone tree lit up through Arizona, Nevada, California. By midnight, 50 bikes were gassed up and pointed south. And the boy who'd fixed a stranger's engine in the desert had no idea that the chain he'd just linked was already pulling a storm toward his grandmother's front door. The sun came up like a warning. Marcus was in the kitchen, counting the 46th day on the wall, when the first vibration rattled the glass in the cabinets. A low tremor, then another, then a sound that stopped being individual engines and became a single rolling earthquake heading down Mesquite Road. Miss Loretta, dozing in her chair, jerked awake, her walker scraping the linoleum. Marcus ran to the front window, and the scene outside stole his breath. 50 motorcycles, chrome and black steel, were rolling into the yard, turning the patchy grass and gravel into a parking lot of leather and idling thunder. The lead bike was the same custom Harley he'd fixed yesterday, its skull and wings catching the dawn light. The biker he'd helped, the one who tried to hand him crumpled 20s, dismounted and pulled off his helmet with a deliberate slowness, his eyes scanning the house, the sagging porch, the missing shingles, the foreclosure notice still taped to the front door. Marcus stepped outside barefoot, the gravel biting his heels, while behind him Miss Loretta clutched her walker at the screen door, her face a map of confusion and fear. The big biker raised a hand and the engines cut as one. Silence, thick and sudden. He walked forward, heavy boots crunching, the Hell's Angels patch on his back visible to the whole neighborhood. He stopped 3 feet from Marcus, who suddenly felt every inch of his 15 years, and pointed a thick finger at the house. "Your boy's chain just linked back," he said, his voice like gravel sliding down a chute. "Brothers, look. This boy worked 2 hours in the sun for nothing because his grandma taught him kindness. Now we teach him what brotherhood looks like. This house is a disgrace." "Fix it." Men dismounted like soldiers receiving orders. Tools appeared, hammers, saws, nail guns, from saddlebags and pickup trucks that had rolled in behind the bikes. A flatbed was already backing up the drive, piled with lumber, drywall, concrete bags. Miss Loretta began to cry, the kind of silent tears that come from a place so deep no sound can follow. Marcus stood frozen as the bikers swarmed the property, not with menace, but with the focused intensity of a pit crew. One of them, a red-bearded giant with arms like bridge cables, paused in front of Miss Loretta's screen door, removed his sunglasses, and said softly, "Ma'am, we got a brother named Tank who's a licensed contractor. Another, Doc, rebuilt homes after Katrina. We're gonna make this right. But first you need to sit down and let me get you some coffee. Where's the kitchen?" She pointed with a trembling hand, and within minutes the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the open door. By mid-morning, the yard was a small construction site. The bikers moved with a discipline that belied their rough appearance. Tank, the contractor, was on the roof with a crew of 6, stripping decayed shingles and exposing the damaged plywood. Doc, a quiet man with a medic's cross tattooed on his neck, had set up a first aid station in the shade just in case, and was already checking Miss Loretta's blood pressure with a portable cuff. Marcus was pulled into the engine of the garage, where 3 club members had discovered his collection of salvaged parts and were treating it like a museum. They spoke to him in the language of torque wrenches and compression ratios, asking his opinion on a rebuilt carburetor they'd found on his workbench. And for the first time, Marcus felt seen not as a boy with a broken home, but as a mechanic. But there was a shift in the air when a pickup with Arizona state plates parked at the edge of the lot, and a man in a cheap suit got out, holding a clipboard. The bank representative. He'd come to do a final property assessment before the foreclosure deadline, and the sight of 50 bikers apparently renovating the house had stopped him mid-step. He stood there, mouth open, as the chapter president, Scratch, walked up to him, wiping his hands on a rag. "Can I help you?" Scratch asked, voice flat. The man stammered about legal violations, about needing to inspect the property, about calling the police. Scratch just smiled, a slow, unnerving smile, and handed him a folded document. "Read it," he said. It was a temporary restraining order, filed that morning by a club attorney in Phoenix, asserting the family's right to repair and contest the foreclosure due to predatory lending practices. The bank man's face went pale. Scratch stepped closer. "Now you can get back in your truck and tell your bosses that the house on Mesquite Road has a new maintenance crew. Or you can stand here and make a phone call. But I promise you, every call you make, I got a lawyer who's made more calls than you've had hot dinners. This property isn't going anywhere." The man retreated, tires spinning on the gravel. Inside, Miss Loretta sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by bikers who were gently packing her china into boxes so the kitchen floor could be replaced. One of them, a lean man with a braided beard, held up a photograph of a young black soldier in uniform, a man in his 20s with kind eyes. "This your husband?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak. He placed it carefully in a padded box. "My daddy served with a man like him in Vietnam, told me about it before he passed." She reached out and touched his hand, and the room went very still. By late afternoon, the roof was sealed, the porch joists replaced, and a fresh coat of primer was going on the exterior walls. Marcus, grime-streaked and exhausted, sat on the tailgate of the flatbed next to the biker he'd rescued, who called himself Goose. Goose lit a cigarette, offered one to Marcus, who shook his head. "You know," Goose said, "I was broke down on that highway for 2 hours before you showed. Nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed down. Folks see the patch and they think criminal, they think danger." He flicked ash. "I got a daughter your age, lives with her mama in Tucson. I send money, but I ain't been around. I'm trying to do better. Then you show up, a kid with a rusted bike and a heart the size of this state, and you remind me what I'm trying for. So this," he gestured at the house, "this ain't charity. This is repentance." Marcus just nodded, not understanding yet how heavy that word would become. The pivot came at dusk, when the work halted for dinner. Scratch gathered everyone in the yard, 100 eyes on him, and he pulled a folded envelope from his cut. "One more thing before we eat," he announced. Our treasurer ran the numbers. The loan on this house was sold twice to shell companies. The interest rate was jacked to 19%. We got our attorney to look at it. Turns out, the bank that holds the note has a history of servicing violations. We're filing a lawsuit to void the whole foreclosure, but that takes time." He paused, looking at Marcus and his grandmother, who was now standing beside the boy. "So meanwhile, we took a collection. The envelope wasn't paper, it was a cashier's check. $26,000, Scratch said. "That covers the arrears, the penalties, and the next 6 months. It's not a loan. It's a gift from 50 brothers who owe you nothing and everything. Welcome to the family." Miss Loretta broke down, her face in her hands, and Marcus caught her before she fell. The bikers, these men who'd been feared and shunned, stood in a circle around them, heads bowed, some with tears of their own. The chain that started with a rusted toolkit and a refusal to take payment had just pulled a family back from the abyss. But as Marcus held the check, his mind raced not to gratitude, but to a deeper unease. Why were these men, these outcasts, willing to risk so much for a stranger's child? And what would the town, the neighbors, the authorities do when they learned that the most dangerous club in America had just become the saviors of Mesquite Road? The answer was already rattling in the desert wind, and it was darker than any of them knew. But the gift didn't land like relief. It landed like a grenade in a quiet war the family never knew they were in. 3 days after the check cleared, a letter arrived from the bank's legal department, notifying Miss Loretta that the payment was being rejected due to third-party interference in a pending foreclosure action. They were claiming the cashier's check was a fraudulent attempt to circumvent the repossession process. Marcus watched his grandmother read the letter, her hands shaking, the paper trembling like a live thing. She didn't cry. She just folded it, placed it in her Bible, and said, "They want us to be afraid. I stopped being afraid the night 50 strangers fixed my roof." But Marcus saw the fear she hid, and it lit a cold fire in his gut. The second blow came from the neighbors. Mesquite Road was a working-class strip where people kept to themselves, but the presence of 50 Harley-riding, patch-wearing men had not gone unnoticed. A petition started circulating, signed by 11 households, demanding that the county sheriff investigate suspected gang activity at the Tate property. The woman 3 doors down, a retired postal clerk named Mrs. Grady, told a local reporter that she feared for her grandchildren. "Those men look like criminals," she said on camera, "and now they're living on our street. Never mind that the bikers had done more home repair in 3 days than the whole block had seen in a decade." The optic was fear, and fear sold papers. Then the sheriff showed up, not with guns drawn but with a courteous knock and a grim expression. Deputy Haskins, a veteran with a sun-creased face, sat at the kitchen table and explained the problem. "Ma'am," he said to Miss Loretta, "I know these men are helping you. I see the roof, the porch, the paint. but there's a state statute against known criminal organizations assembling on residential property for more than 48 hours. The Hells Angels are classified as an organized crime syndicate under Arizona law. If they don't disperse, I'll be forced to make arrests. He paused, looking uncomfortable. I don't want to do that, but the pressure is coming from the county attorney and it's tied to that bank complaint. Someone's pulling strings. Scratch, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. Deputy, will comply, but you need to know what's really going on. That bank has been stripping equity from black homeowners in this county for years. We pulled the property records. 19 homes foreclosed in the last 18 months, all owned by elderly black residents, all bought by the same shell company registered in Delaware. It's equity theft, plain and simple, and the county attorney's office has been sitting on the evidence. Haskins' face went through a slow transformation, from professional caution to dawning horror. He took the folder Scratch handed him, a thick file of deeds, court records, and a whistleblower's memo from a former bank loan officer who'd gone on record about the scheme. I'll look into this, the deputy said quietly and left. That night the story broke on the 11 o'clock news. The footage was surreal. Drone shots of the renovated house, interviews with Goose and Tank, close-ups of Miss Loretta's tear-streaked face, and a stark graphic showing the foreclosure map of the county. The narrative flipped. The public, hungry for a David and Goliath tale, latched on. By morning, a GoFundMe started by a local pastor had raised $14,000 for the family's legal fees. The bank's stock dipped. The county attorney held a press conference, stone-faced, claiming an independent investigation was underway. It was a miracle of momentum, and for the first time in months, Marcus let himself believe they might actually win. But then the third letter came, and everything curdled. It was from the Arizona State Attorney General's office, not about the foreclosure but about Marcus. He was 15, a minor, and his guardianship arrangement, informal, never legalized after his mother vanished, was being challenged. A social worker would be conducting a home visit on Friday. If the house wasn't deemed a stable environment, Marcus could be removed and placed in foster care. The unspoken threat was obvious. All these bikers, all this publicity, had made the boy's living situation a target. Someone, somewhere, had dug into the family's vulnerabilities and found the softest spot. Scratch convened a war council in the garage. This isn't just the bank anymore, he said, voice tight. This is someone with power who got embarrassed and is striking back. They can't attack my club directly without a federal case, so they're going through the kid. He lit a cigarette, the tip glowing in the dim light. We need to make this house so clean, so safe, so undeniably good that no social worker can touch it, and we need to find out who's behind this. I've got a guy, a digital forensics guy, working on those shell companies. We're close. The next day, the bikers transformed again. They built handrails for Miss Loretta's walker, child-proofed the kitchen, organized Marcus's school records, installed a security system, and filled the pantry with food. They became, in the eyes of any observer, a model extended family. When the social worker arrived, a tired-eyed woman named Ms. Alvarez, she found a spotless home, a happy teenager discussing his grades and his engine projects, and a grandmother surrounded by a support network of, yes, unusual men who spoke softly and deferred to her with respect. The interview lasted 2 hours. At the end, Ms. Alvarez closed her folder and said, "This is the safest home I've visited in months. I'll recommend continued custody without reservation." Miss Loretta, for the first time since the storm began, allowed herself a full, deep breath. But Scratch's investigator found something darker. The shell company that owned the foreclosed properties was linked, through a chain of anonymous LLCs, to a sitting state judge and a real estate developer with deep political ties. They had been using the bank as a front to acquire land cheaply, and the Mesquite Road property sat on a parcel that was key to a planned highway extension. The family's home wasn't just a house. It was in the way of a multi-million-dollar infrastructure project. The attacks on Marcus, the CPS call, the neighbor petition, none of it was random. It was a coordinated campaign to crush one stubborn family so the machinery of progress could roll right over them. The fight was no longer about a roof and four walls. It was about a boy, a club of outlaws, and a conspiracy that reached into the highest corners of the state. And the battle for that sagging house on Mesquite Road was about to become a reckoning no one saw coming. The forensic trail didn't just expose a corrupt judge. It cracked open a statewide pattern. Scratch's digital guy, a former NSA analyst who now ran a motorcycle repair shop in Flagstaff, had traced the shell companies not only to the judge, but to a real estate development firm controlled by the judge's brother-in-law. The highway extension project had been quietly approved in a closed-door committee meeting 2 years earlier, and the Mesquite Road parcel was the final piece needed to break ground. 17 other black homeowners had already been displaced, their properties acquired for fractions of their value through the foreclosure mill. The evidence was damning: falsified appraisals, forged maintenance default notices, and a paper trail of kickbacks laundered through a Phoenix title company. When the file landed on the desk of an investigative reporter at the Arizona Republic, the story detonated. Front page headline: Highway Robbery, How a Judge, a Developer, and a Bank Stole a Neighborhood. The county attorney, cornered, had no choice but to convene a grand jury. The judge resigned the next day. For Miss Loretta, the phone call came on a Thursday afternoon. The state attorney general's office, now fully aware of the conspiracy, had fast-tracked a review of her mortgage. The loan was declared predatory and voided entirely. Her title was clear, free, and unencumbered. Not only that, but the class action settlement from the bank's fraud division included a compensation fund for victims. She received a check for $32,000, enough to cover years of maintenance, to replace the rusted appliances, to finally stop counting pennies for her medication. She sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd once cried over the foreclosure notice, and stared at the check like it was a foreign language. Marcus, now 16, stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder. He'd grown 5 inches in the chaos, his voice deeper, his hands calloused from real work. The boy who fixed a stranger's Harley had become the man of the house, not by default but by earned strength. The bikers didn't vanish when the legal battle ended. They showed up on weekends, not to rebuild but to visit. Goose brought his daughter Lily down from Tucson, and she and Marcus spent hours in the garage, him teaching her how to gap a spark plug, her teaching him how to laugh without weight. Tank installed a wheelchair ramp for Miss Loretta's bad days, even though she insisted she didn't need it yet. Doc continued to check her vitals every month, recording them in a small notebook he kept in his saddlebag. The Hells Angels became uncles, protectors, an unlikely extended family that defied every stereotype the town had once armed against them. Mrs. Grady, the neighbor who'd signed the petition, knocked on the door one afternoon with a casserole and a trembling apology. Miss Loretta accepted both with the same grace she'd shown the bikers in the rain: quiet, undeserved, transformative. The surprising detail came from an old deed found in a county archive. When the investigation dug into the property's history, they discovered that the land had once been part of a homestead grant awarded to a black Union Army veteran in 1872, Marcus's great-great-grandfather. The developer's scheme had not only targeted a vulnerable family, it had literally attempted to erase a legacy that predated the state itself. The Historical Society got involved, and the house was designated a local heritage site, protecting it from any future seizure. The bronze plaque that the bikers installed that summer didn't just commemorate a renovation. It read, "Here stands the home of the Freeman Tate family, kept by kindness, restored by brothers, a witness to the long arc of justice." It was bolted to the porch beam, directly above the spot where the foreclosure notice once hung. As the heat broke into autumn, Marcus received a letter of his own. It was from the Iron Crows MC, a different club but bound by the same code. They'd heard the story through the grapevine and wanted to offer him a scholarship to a vocational automotive program in Phoenix. Full tuition, tools, and a mentor. The only condition: pass the knowledge on someday. Marcus enrolled, and on his first day, he wore a jacket with a small patch on the sleeve that Goose had given him. It wasn't a gang patch. It was a single word stitched in gold thread: chain. The boy who once fixed lawnmowers for grocery money was now training to become a master mechanic, his grandmother secure, his future no longer a foreclosure notice waiting to fall. But the final reckoning happened in a courtroom. The judge's brother-in-law was sentenced to 12 years for fraud and conspiracy. The judge himself faced disbarment and federal charges. At the sentencing, Miss Loretta was asked to give a victim impact statement. She walked slowly to the podium, her walker clicking on the tile, and she looked directly at the men who had tried to take everything from her. Her voice was soft, but it carried to the back of the room. You saw an old black woman and a boy and thought we were easy. You didn't see the 50 men on motorcycles who taught me that no one is invisible. My grandson told a stranger, kindness is a chain. You never understood that chain links both ways. Today, I don't ask the court for vengeance. I ask that you remember, when you tried to lock us out, someone else opened a door. Then she turned and walked out, past the row of leather vests filling the gallery, past the judge's empty seat into a sun that felt, for the first time in years, like morning. The thing about chains is they don't stop with one link. Marcus's kindness on a hot highway linked to 50 bikers, then to a community that had to look in the mirror, then to a courtroom, then to a scholarship, then to a boy who will one day fix a stranger's engine and pass it on. You look at the Hell's Angels and see scary men with tattoos. Miss Loretta saw hungry men with cold hands. One believed the worst, the other believed the moment. And that single choice changed the legal map of a county, brought down a corrupt judge, and saved a family's home that had stood since Reconstruction. But here's the part that lingers. Marcus didn't know who he was helping. He just saw a broken machine and a frustrated man. He didn't calculate risk or reward. He just acted because his grandmother had planted a seed years ago, and it flowered in the desert heat when it mattered most. Kindness isn't a strategy, it's a reflex. And the world is full of people who look dangerous but are carrying a heart attack in the rain, waiting for someone to open the door. So I'll leave you with the question that haunted me after this story. When the bikers knocked on those 5 doors before reaching Marcus's house, every person who said no had a reason: fear, safety, assumptions. But the 6th door said yes. That's the door that changed everything. Which door would you have been? Don't answer fast. Think about it. If this story hit you, drop a heart in the comments for the chain. Share it with someone who's forgotten that quiet courage still walks around in leather and tattoos. Because somewhere out there tonight, a stranger is stranded, and a kid with a rusty bike is about to become the 7th door.